Just when you thought AI news and developments have reached peak saturation, it seems there's always something new that captures our collective imagination. Every week brings a new large language model, it seems, and that's the backbone of many AI implementations. But most importantly, most recently, AI is getting a Hindi language breakthrough. It's part of a project unveiled earlier this month at the UAE-India Business Forum in Mumbai, and it's called NANDA. Named after one of India's highest peaks, it's a technological and cultural feat in and of itself that's supposed to open the doors to AI for more than 500 million Hindi language speakers around the world. NANDA is a partnership between G42, the UAE-based tech holding group, the Mohamed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence, and the American AI company Cerebras. These recent LLMs are a bit of a departure from what we're used to. For the longest time, they've centered around mainly English, leading some to worry that all those English-based LLMs will lead to information bias and create an uphill battle for other languages and cultures trying to get a foot in the artificial intelligence door. So without a doubt, this is a monumental step forward in the realm of artificial intelligence, but in a world where mentions of AI conjure up images of tech ethics and information wars, where do these new burgeoning LLMs fit in? Just several years into AI's rapid ascent, we must ask the question, is there enough diversity in the technology being felt all over the world? This is Business Extra, and I'm your host, Cody Combs. In this episode, I'll be looking at whether we're finally entering a new age of language and cultural diversity with technology, or whether or not we're just scratching the surface of what's possible. Joining me now is Preslav Nakov, who's a professor at MBZ UAI specializing in artificial intelligence and computational linguistics. He's here to explain this project, what it does, and what it means in the realm of LLMs and beyond. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
So LLMs aren't necessarily new. They've been around for a little bit, but how have language models developed to become the LLMs that we all know and use today?
Well, language model kind of traditionally has been just a probabilistic model that given a piece of text, let's say a sentence or some longer piece of text, assigns it a probability. So basically imagine that every single thing among the infinite number of things that you can say, let's say in English, has to be assigned a probability, and the sum of all possible probabilities of all possible things, which is an infinite number, right, has to sum to 1. And it's something that is very, very useful. It's something that actually you need if you do machine translation, if you do speech recognition, if you do OCR, for example, you scan a document. Actually, what you want to do is, there was this idea of the noisy channel model, which goes back to cryptography. The idea was that I have one part of the model, let's say if I do translation, that cares about whether I preserve the meaning, and I have another part of the model where checks whether it actually makes sense, whether somebody in English, suppose that I translate something from Arabic to English, whether somebody in English could have possibly said this, okay? And this is where it started. It was just like language modeling. It was something to assign a probability. Of course, you can use this model also to generate. So basically, because you can ask it, given this sequence, what is the most likely next word? And it's essentially what the core of the large language model is. You just do next word prediction. This is how they are trained. How do you train them? Well, you basically give it, let's say, a book, or you give it like a web page, or you give it any piece of text, and you say, okay, here's a sequence, predict the next word. Then you give it the next word, predict the next one. And you update the parameters of the model, and you have something that learns to generate. And where their power comes from? Well, people have been training those large language models initially on big corporate. At some point, 1 billion words was a big thing. Now those are trained on trillions of words. Theoretically, we can train them on the entire web. Right? And this means that actually they have internally all the knowledge that is contained in all these texts. So, and people have realized that they're actually more than something that can assign probability to a text, right? And actually, if you train them to specific tasks, right? If you train them in a specific way, if you fine-tune them, instruction tune them, they can actually solve a variety of tasks. They can solve math problems, they can write poetry, they can do all those amazing things that you have seen with ChatGPT, with JSON and other models.
According to G42, NANDA, this most recent LLM, Hindi-based LLM, 13 billion parameters, trained on approximately 2.13 trillion tokens of language datasets. To the layperson, what does that mean, particularly the tokens and parameters?
Well, the parameters, this is basically tells you how many connections are there in the neural network. So basically you have like a huge neural network that has like many layers, and you have different neurons there, which kind of somehow mimics the idea of the human brain, that you have those kind of neuroscience, those are the neurons. And actually the question is, how do two neurons connect, right? And what happens when some information goes there? How is being passed? How is being amplified or inhibited? And that's actually the number of parameters, right? How many connections you have. And with large language models, traditionally, In machine learning, it has been, if I want to train on something, the more parameters I have, the more training data actually I need. And for large language models has been studied, they have like different studies that you need probably about 20 words for each parameter. And that's where you can see why you need certain number of tokens. So tokens, basically, that's words. And actually, this is something very important because it's not exactly words, okay? And that's one of the problems. If you take kind of general language models like Llama, like ChatGPT, they're not really tailored for every single language. They're very good at English. And over there, what is a token and what is a word is almost one-to-one. But for other languages, that's not the case. So for Hindi, for Arabic, one word gets chopped maybe into 4 different pieces, okay? Which means that you really think about it. Instead of working on words, it works on pieces of word. And if you chop a word into individual characters or pairs of characters, how much semantics, how much meaning there is, right? If you think about it, right? They still work because of the massive number of parameters, the massive number of knowledge, but it's not optimal. That's one. The second thing is that you lose kind of all these models, they have certain context, certain number of words that they can consume. And what is happening if you have the wrong tokenization, you basically limit your context window. And the last point is that because of that, you have much more computation because it's quadratic. So basically, we have on average about 17 times more computation. And as a user, if you're using their API of those models, you are paying like 17 times more, right? That's why kind of you want really to do something that actually is tailored for a target language. That's especially bad if you have a different kind of alphabet, like Arabic for J's or like Hindi for Nanda. So you need a model that understands the language better. But it goes beyond that. Okay, it goes beyond that because there's also cultural specificity, right? You want actually to understand, even if you have English, right? I mean, English is used also in the UAE, English is also used in India, right? But it's not exactly the same English. It's not the same kind of events. It's not the same kind of culture. It's not the same kind of companies and history and geography that is being discussed. So you really need to localize those language models to the local culture.
Just how big of a deal, how significant is it, if at all, is it that we have a Hindi large language model now?
Well, I mean, Hindi is one of the biggest languages in the world. So just like Arabic is one of the largest languages with a big number of speakers. So, and again, the standard language models that have been developed, they don't pay attention to all languages around, right? And this is especially painful when you have a different script.
So for the last few years, we've seen the initial LLMs have been English-based. You have these other LLMs, this most recent one, Hindi-based, a couple Arabic ones as well. How is the world doing in terms of diversification, in terms of LLM languages? Are we making progress, or is this kind of just a drop in the pond?
Well, you see increasing language capabilities of the standard language models, right? Because they get trained on some mixture of other languages. Now, the problem is that there's also the curse of multilinguality. So if you want to be universal, if you want kind of the model to understand all languages, in a way, for certain languages, it's going to be helpful because if you have like some minor language, right, it can benefit for knowledge about some neighboring languages that are somehow related. Okay, so even if for a human, if I speak one language, this helps me understand some related languages, right? So on the one hand, it's helpful. On the other hand, it's actually harmful. Okay, because all these parameters, the languages are competing for those parameters. The languages are competing for the vocabulary. So there's kind of a limit in the vocabulary size. So basically, if you really want to have many languages, this is beneficial for small languages, but it's harmful for big ones. So if you're serious about being good on some specific language, let's say Arabic or let's say Hindi, you want to focus on this language. So that's why, for example, when we built JACE, we call it an Arabic-centric language model. So if we put Arabic at the center, of course, you also want English. Why? Well, because certain tasks, and one of the tasks that you want to do is probably translation between Arabic and English, between Hindi and English. So that it's good to have English. Also, a lot of world knowledge is there in English. If you have a language, having a small number of languages actually is good. The model can benefit a lot of this, especially if one of them is English. But having too many, like a few hundred, actually can harm the performance for big languages. It is going to be beneficial for small ones.
So I want to talk a little bit more about Arabic, because in the past, even before this AI explosion, if you will, we've done stories about products that try to implement Arabic, and we've spoken with various experts, various linguists, and some people tell us, they say Arabic is very complex. It's a little bit more difficult to do. That's why it takes longer. Others have said, though, it's not the complexity, it's the lack of priority that's put on it, the lack of resources that are applied to it. Where's the truth in that? Why does it seem we don't have as many Arabic LLMs or Arabic implementations of technology compared to English?
Well, okay, so we started working on an Arabic LLM, kind of started preparing for this, collecting data and initial experiments, even before ChatGPT came around, right? And why we don't see that many models? Well, there are several reasons, right? So one of them is actually training such a model from scratch takes a lot of time, right? So I have been talking about many models come. Not, yes, that's true, but on the other hand, not that many, okay? What I mean, if you go on Hugging Face, there are like tens of thousands of language models, okay? But actually, most of them are based on one or some other big language model. So basically, they are more like adaptations, more like instruction tuning, right? So JACE is different. JACE was trained from scratch.
JACE being the Arabic LLM that...
Yes, the Arabic LLM, yes. So kind of, it really takes a lot of compute and a lot of engineering. And actually, when we started, now there's more knowledge about it. But when we started, there was very few people in the world who have built something like that. So there was much less understanding. You had to really learn a lot, right? And the way that you do it, you need to build a few thousand models of smaller sizes and try all kinds of things, right? Because the point is that the big one you can train only once. And you want to be absolutely sure. And those things are very fragile. Very little variations in the parameters that you start with can actually lead to either a very good model or to a disaster. And what you want to, and the big one trains for a few months. And you really want to be damn sure that this is going to work, right? So what you do is train several models of smaller sizes, and you try to see which directions it's going. And it's different each time. It's different. It depends on your data. It depends on your language. So actually, training something from scratch is not that simple. Now, the adapting, there have been efforts also trying to adapt, let's say, something like Guama, right, to work on Arabic. And that kind of works. But I told what the fundamental problem is. The fundamental problem is that the model has been the wrong vocabulary, treats the language differently, right? And you cannot just go with simple adaptation, right? You need really a lot of training, a lot of data. Now, it's not just a matter of attention, okay? It's also a matter of lack of data. So, for example, for English, there's publicly available data of about, 10 to 15 trillion tokens. Tokens means, let's say, words, right? 10 to 15 trillion words. But for Arabic, what you can get is probably about 500 million, right? So it's much less, right? And additionally, we have estimated that probably just about 2% of the Arabic text that exists in the world actually exists also in digital form, right? So the vast majority of the text is actually somewhere else. And I see a lot of potential there, right? So if you can scan the books, all this knowledge, it's knowledge that is not available in English. It's not the knowledge that is not available in any other language. You can even think of whether even solving certain kinds of tasks would be made better in a different language. Maybe thinking about mathematical problems, right? Using the way that people have been thinking in the past, or thinking of historical problems or religious or other things, right? It can be done much better in another language. Even for quantum, let me give you an example. There's an Australian language, right, that doesn't have a mention of left and right. It only has it doesn't have relative positions. It only has absolute. So the way that I talk is like I was talking to him and he was to the north of me, and then I went west or something like that kind of. People really and of course those people have absolute sense of direction because they cannot even speak about things because there's only absolute positions. So you'd argue that in a language like this, planning, right, that has things about positions would be much easier. So there can be aspects where actually thinking in Arabic might be a better way to go, especially if you have like good historical literature.
So you obviously work for MBZ UAI. How has MBZ UAI helped out with some of these LLMs?
Well, we have been working in close collaboration with G42 on that from the very beginning. And we have been also collaborating with Cerebras for the compute, because those are large language models that require a lot of computation. So it was a truly collaborative effort. So where we have been co-leading the efforts for the Arabic language model, and now working together on Hindi.
I want to go a little bit off topic. We have an election coming up in just a few weeks. It's been a year of elections. There's been all sorts of campaign commercials. There's been disinformation campaigns. There's been misinformation out there. You specialize in identifying disinformation, media bias, things along those lines. There's all these fears about AI making the problem potentially worse. How is the world doing coping with AI disinformation so far? How are we doing so far? Are we doing well at combating it? Is the threat overhyped? What do you think?
Well, okay, so the generative AI has given tools to the bad guys to generate disinformation at scale, to adapt it to a specific style, right? Even potentially to impersonate politicians, journalists, to create automatic websites, to create massive campaigns, this also kind of robocalling and all that, right? So it has given a lot of power and a lot of opportunities to bad actors. At the same time, my personal opinion is that, and this is also based on conversations with professional fact checkers and researchers in the field. We actually recently wrote an article for Nature Machine Intelligence on the topic. My personal opinion is actually that fact checkers and the good guys have much more to gain from this. Okay, because the power of same tools actually can empower us to do much more, kind of to do much better disinformation. So, for example, we have been using those same large language models to do fact checking better, right? We have been kind of to discover whether something is viral. So, for example, fact checkers cannot fact check every single claim in the world, okay? They are looking into what is viral, okay, what is common. The problem is that the bad guys can disguise. They can mutate the claim in many different ways so that it goes under the radar. But now we can use the same language models actually to normalize it in a canonical form and actually discover that. We have been looking into detecting whether something was machine generated. Actually, those large language models, even smaller ones, can tell us. So it allows us to automate the fact-checking, the discovery at scale. So kind of the same tools that the bad guys can use are used also by the good guys, and it gives us much, much more power.
And as a journalist, obviously we consider ourselves fact checkers. So there's some good news in what you said there. So that's really interesting. Preslav Nakov, thanks so much for joining us on Business Extra. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for hearing me.
That's it for this week's episode. Feel free to subscribe to Business Extra on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasting content so you can have the latest episodes as soon as they come out. This episode was produced by Doa Farid, Yasmin Al-Taji, and Arthur Edison. I'm your host, Cody Combs, future editor for The National.